The gender of Pan-Africanism, the International Council of Women of Dark Races. The internationalism of the African American woman present in the Columbian Exposition and that of women active in Pan-African movement will come together through an organization that some of these women will go through to establish during and after World War I. This is the case of the International Council of Women of Dark Races, founded in 1922. It initially called the International Common of the Women of Dark Races of the World. Its members demanded civil rights and global citizenship for women of color. Its initiators included well-known African-American women like Mary Call Bethune, Mary Church Terrell, Margaret Murray Washington, as well as less famous women who nevertheless leaders among women of color at that time, especially in the NACW, including Natty Henling Burroughs, Addie Wade Hutton, Charlotte Hawkins Brown, and Jeanette Porn Barnett. African American women speakers and attendees in Chicago was involved in the creation were Haley Quinton Brown, Fannie Barrett Williams, Mary Bernard Tarrant, and LaGuina Barnes Hope. Many of these women have multiple affiliations with various kinds of organizations, including the WCA, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the NAACP, the National Urban League, and the International Council of Women. However, this pluralism activism had a limited space, and each one could dedicate to the new organization. For some, participated in an international conference belonging to the organization that were not exclusively black, offered a global stage from which they created a cross-ethnic, transnational racial identity that surpassed the borders of the United States. For example, is in a speech Mary Terrell Church gave at the 1904 Conference of International Conference of Women in Berlin, in which she explained that she was not just representing women of color in her own country, but the whole continent of Africa as well, thus tying together the civil rights battles of the black women to an international battle of the anti-colonial movements. The ICWDR aimed to spread awareness and condition of colored women in countries like Haiti, India, China, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, to encourage the widespread recognition of not only their history and success, but also the ills of colonialism. Encouraging racial pride as a founding element of self-determination in the U.S., the ICWDR promoted a nationalist philosophy whose popularity was increasing among African American community, while at the same time it also identified itself with the battles of the darker races around the world. As recorded in its founding documents, we are a band of women, though small, working every other group of women to bring about the things that we all stand for: justice and fair play for every woman in every land. Later, Haley Quinn Brown wrote the President Margaret Mary Washington interest in the condition of foreign women. She thought and spoke of them as our sisters, and she, in her hope that this council will bring together women of darker races in close sympathetic contact. The agenda of this new organization centered on education, international affairs, and social uplift, was entrusted to study groups that played an important role in development and the spread of African studies. A.D. White Man Dickerson presided over the Committee of Foreign Relations, which many study groups were formed to examine the condition of women in Africa and India and the relationship between the African American women and women of color, the darker races around the world. The fact that India and its resistance to British colonialism were the center of their interests proved that blackness was based primarily on political symbolic dimensions. The relationship formed several years ago between Mary Call Bethune, president of the National Council of Colored Women, and Jawaharlal Pandit Nehru testified to the connection between African Americans and India against the colonial repression around the world, and the subject of an interesting book by Nicholas Slate, who raised the fund of the color cosmopolitan. According to the Constitution of the organization, members comprise of 50 American African women and 50 foreigners of color. Along with the Vice President Mary Church Terrell and Addie Wade Hutton, the organization was led by Margaret Murray Washington, who, as I mentioned earlier, had been the Dean of Women in Tuskegee Institute in 1889, where she created the Tuskegee Women's Club with Booker T. Washington, whom she later married. She had also led a study group there on the conditions of foreign women. The ICWDR, whose acts are important, yet micro-political, took a utopian approach of proposing to resolve the problems of women of darker races. As Mary Bernard Tower would explain a few years after the foundation, She is an acquaintance with forward-thinking women of China, Japan, and Constantinople in Africa. We need women from one of each of these groups to join us in solving the problem for women of the darker races of the world. The often repeated goal in studying and spreading awareness of the condition of the colored women around the world and creating an international contact with association building interests of a global community of black women was therefore ambitious for a small, dispersed group, and often came under scarcity of funds and non-acceptance of the Roman role in international relations and living in human resources. Study groups and fundraising for targeting campaigns will constitute the group fundamental strategies. For example, the Chicago West Side African Women's Club, which had ties to ICWDR, supported the efforts of Ida Casey Hayford, the wife of the Afro-nationalist Joseph Kasef Hayford, and a teacher for many years in Sierra Leone, to build a school and later a hospital in Liberia. She was even nominated vice president for Africa. In 1922, Emily Williams stayed several months in Haiti on behalf of ICWDR, and the following year gave talks about the situation on the island. In fact, 3 countries were particularly significant. Sierra Leone had been a destination for emancipation of Americans and the slaves of the West Indies since the 19th century. As for Liberia, from the 1920s and on, both Liberia and Ethiopia were independent black nations admitted to the League of Nations in 1919 and 1923, respectively. Hattie White Hutton became president of ICWDR after Mary Washington's death in 1925. A graduate of Oberlin, Hutton had an extensive international experience, having resided in Madagascar, France, Guadeloupe, Azores, and Liberia. She was also the first chair of the WILPF Interracial Extension Committee and head of the Peace and Foreign Relations Department of the NACW. Strongly interested in Pan-Africanism, Hutton was primarily involved in the situation in Haiti and wrote the report in 1929 condemning the occupation of the country, which she visited in 1927. As a representative of CWDR, in 1929 she helped found the Slave Haiti League, which united a protest against occupation with philanthropic and social work services. In 1932, Hutton gave a vibrant speech on the same topic at the NAACP conference and helped WILPF leader Emily Green Botch draft the book Occupied Haiti. It is difficult to define and articulate the role of African American women organizations within the realm of the Pan-African movement, because research in this area remains scant and recent and often superficial because it's emphasized by Merle Sinclair. The term Pan-Africanism is often used in a simplistic way without discriminating the movement and ideologies. The precursor to the first Pan-African Conference in 1900 was the Congress on African Ideology, also called a Conference on Africa, which was held in August 14th through the 21st in 1893, concurring with the World Columbian expansion in Chicago. It deserves further research. Conceived by Frederick Perry Noble, participants include Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Thomas T. Fortune, and probably Haley Quinton Brown and Francis Ellen Watkins Harper. The London Congress of 1900, strongly backed by Booker T. Washington, who took part in the preparatory meeting, although not the conference, laid the foundations of Pan-Africanism, or the Pan-African Association, which is supposed to meet every 2 years, Boston in 1902 and Haiti in 1904, though this never happened. 6 African American women participated in the inaugural conference: Anna J. Cooper, Anna H. Jones, Fannie Barrett Williams, Ada Harris, Janet Robertson, widow of the first president of Liberia, James Jenkins Roberts, and Harriet Helen. Although it's difficult to trace the presence of the African American women in the Pan-African conferences, it seems that Mary Burnett Tower, Addie Wade Hutton, and Ida Gilbert Hunt attended the second one, which took place in Paris in 1919. Hutton and Hunt were also members of the International Committee of the Third Pan-African Congress of 1921, which was held in London and Brussels and far more radical. In fact, one result of the document supported the independence of Haiti, Liberia, and Ethiopia. The Fourth Pan-African Congress in 1923 was held in London and Lisbon, and Ida Gibbs Hunt, living in France at the time, co-chaired the organizational board of the Congress with W. Du Bois and presented the color of races in the League of Nations. The Fifth Pan-African Conference was supposed to take place in 1925 in Africa or the West Indies, but the government of France and England opposed it. Ida White Hutton, then Vice President of ICWDR, with the Circle of Peace and Foreign Relations, therefore decided to organize it in New York in 1927. The Congress was attended by 5,000 people and proposed immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops from Haiti, a proposal approved by WILPF the year before. Attendees included African-American Helen Curtis and Ida Whiteman Dickerson, who would later become president of the ICWDR in 1929, following an important career in the world of international causes, including the WILPF. Correspondence between Dickerson and Du Bois from 1929 seemed to indicate the wish of the ICWDR to promote the 6th Pan-African Congress to be held in Haiti or Bermuda, with the agreement of its leader, W. Du Bois. However, this plan was never realized. In fact, the financial crisis prompted by the Great Depression and World War II interrupted the Pan-African Congress till 1945. Yet the ICWDR continued trying to play the active role in the Pan-African movement. In 1929, for example, Dickerson invited Du Bois to give a talk on the subject at a council meeting. I am so anxious that our women shall have some part in the Pan-African meeting that I want you to come and talk with them regarding it. It is the only way in general. Traces of this ending of the commitment also include participation for Dickerson for the ICWDR and Hutton for the WILPF Interracial Commission, so over which he was presiding. At the meeting of the African American leaders, Mordecai Johnson, W. D. Du Bois, Walter White, Rayford Luggan of the Association of Negro Life and History, Charles Wesley, and Emmett Scott of Howard University, held on July 31st, 1933, at the State Department regarding their support for the sovereignty and independence of Liberia. The ICWDR and its leaders, whose views were similar to those of divorce, therefore did more than just organize study groups. Their work manifested as an active international presence in certain relative movements of the Pan-African movement. Thus demonstrating the wish to interweave race and gender on a global basis, feminism and Pan-African drives the first black women activists. These women shared the experience of black in America and therefore dealing with the double discrimination of race and gender. Their experience abroad, among other things, led them to develop a broad vision that demanded civil rights for all Americans, African Americans, education, and international attention for the black women, freedom of colonized people, the creation of the black global community. Yet, though they were conceptualized through their oppression within the realm of global racism and colonialism, they never managed to unify a large number of women of different nationalities. They were either unable, despite their best efforts to recruit a younger generation, the women to carry forth their commitment. As a result, the history of the ICWDR came to an end with the death of its last president, Heidi Whiteman Dickerson, in May 1940. Any ideas and actions survived as thanks to one of its leaders, Mary McLeod Bethune, who in 1935 founded the NCNW, a new organization of African American women with strong global vision and international activism centered on the subject of race, gender, economic justice, and decolonization. Many ICW activists joined the new group, including Legina Burns Hope, who in 1937 became an assistant of Bethune, then the director of the Bureau of Negro Affairs and Youth Administration. So there you have it. International group of women that did pretty good. They was in part of the Black Cabinet. Some of them were, as you know, Bethune probably the best known one out of all of them, the legacy and stuff like that. Hey, subscribe to the channel. Much love. We won't keep this history, keep it popping. We control the pen now. We control it. Peace.